We had a very rare W for GM recently, and no, I'm not talking about that Cadillac's $340,000 starting price. Obviously, no one's gonna buy that, so we're gonna pretend that doesn't exist for a second and just applaud them for not completely killing off the Chevy Bolt. Even though that was kind of something a lot of people saw coming, there was certainly a lot of negative stigma surrounding the Bolt after all of the recalls and battery fires it caused, likely permanently damaging the EV reputation for a lot of people out there. But the sad part about all that is it felt like they had finally gotten it right. Like they had fixed the battery problems, they had improved the design, they had the Bolt EV and the Bolt EUV, and they were actually selling really, really well once they brought them back because, especially with the federal tax credit returning, these were EVs with an over 250-mile range that you could get for under $20,000 after incentives. In some states, it was practically free to drive this thing. Like Colorado has some insanely great state EV incentives, and couple that with the federal tax credit, you were looking at like $15,000 or less for a over 200-mile range EV. But of course, aside from all of the battery fires and recalls that it went through, the biggest flaw with the Chevy Bolt from the beginning was its DC fast charging limitation. Capped at 50 kilowatts, it made it kind of a hard vehicle to road trip with, although people out there still did it. You know, if you price a vehicle low enough, I think people are willing to tolerate a lot of crap, and it seems like the Chevy Bolt had definitely found a little market of its own that a lot of people were passionate about. It was obviously GM's best-selling EV because all the other EVs they were selling were like the Hummer, which about 3 people take delivery of every year, so that one should barely count, honestly, as putting a dent in the EV transition. But we talked about it before, GM was killing the Chevy Bolt for a while. I personally think it was because it was not profitable, and given their wording surrounding the fact that yes, we want to bring back the Chevy Bolt and we're going to be using the Ultium platform, like the way Mary Barra talked about it makes me think that the main focus with pausing the Bolt production and updating it with their new battery platform is going to be cost. Like, yes, the Chevy Bolt was an amazing deal and likely too good of a deal because GM was probably losing a ton of money on it, and they realized, okay, well, if we're going to continue selling the Chevy Bolt, we're going to need to find a way to bring down the price, scale up the manufacturing more profitably, and they're claiming that switching to the Ultium battery platform is going to help enable them do that, which of course is the Tesla method of manufacturing. That's great because we need EVs to be profitable for manufacturers. We can't just have all of them giving away cars all the time. That's not sustainable, and if the vehicle is not profitable, the company has very little motivation to ramp up production further and continue selling more of them, which is kind of why I think GM was headed in that direction of, yeah, we're just going to kill this thing off because it's not profitable. It wasn't from a demand issue. There were tons of people that wanted the Bolt. It's just now they're going to have to go back to the drawing board and figure out exactly how do we make this thing profitable. So I'm very curious and excited to see how they update the design language. My personal suggestion of how they can simplify manufacturing and make the Bolt a way more desirable vehicle, even if it comes with a little bit of a price hike, would be, for one, get rid of the EUV versus the Bolt EV. That's just too complicated. Those vehicles are insanely similar. One is just like a foot longer than the other, and I think that probably complicated the manufacturing line more than it needed to. So just pick a size. It can be the smaller one, it can be the bigger one. I don't really care. Whichever one I guess was more popular or whatever, just go with that one. Drop the whole terminology for EUV. That's confusing. It just stands for electric utility vehicle. Is it that much more utility focused just for being a foot longer? Like, no, just call it the Chevy Bolt. That's fine. I would personally try to simplify the interior a little bit, less complexity, maybe a bit more emphasis on the software, thanks to GM, I guess, going all in on their own in-house design operating system. Allegedly, they're planning on dropping CarPlay and all that, which I think is kind of a mistake. If you already have it, don't get rid of it, but they want to have their own in-house design software that gets updates and all that. So maybe if they're designing more of the software and they want to have a more seamless integration between their hardware and software, you can streamline the interior a bit, bring those pricing down. And of course, the biggest suggestion of all that I think would honestly make the Chevy Bolt a seriously great contender compared to all other EVs on the road, couple that with the fact that yes, GM is switching to NACS in 2025, so they'll be able to access the supercharger network. That's fantastic. But yes, the biggest one, please let the Chevy Bolt support faster DC charging speeds. And by the way, I don't honestly think it needs to be that much faster. Like, a lot of people these days are convinced that if their EV doesn't charge at 250 kilowatts or 350 kilowatts, then it's just not even bearable on a road trip. I have driven over 2,500 miles in the past couple weeks with my Model 3, and it peaks out at 170 kilowatts. And that's honestly plenty. plenty. There have still been scenarios where it's like, okay, we're gonna stop and charge, and I'm gonna go use the restroom, get some food, and come back to the car, and it was almost full. It was at like 91% after just grabbing some lunch and coming back to the car. Honestly, kind of awkwardly fast a lot of the time. So I personally would be perfectly content if the goal of the Chevy Bolt is to be affordable, right? Like having a 200+ mile range and a starting price below $30,000 before incentives. If you can obtain those numbers, then honestly, I think 100 kilowatts is probably fine. 150 would be better, but frankly, I don't think it needs to be all that much more than that. You know, if you start targeting 250, 350 kilowatts, you really got to start beefing up your battery management system. And the truth is, the Chevy Bolt is probably not going to be prioritizing higher range numbers, especially as we're moving towards the NACS standard and chargers having a similar connector and better consistency and reliability across the country. The need for 300+ mile range EVs, I think personally, is going to diminish a bit if you're not towing, and especially if you're trying to make an affordable vehicle. Yeah, Chevy Bolt's gonna have like 60 kilowatt hour battery pack, maybe less, and with a battery pack that small, there's really no need, in my opinion, to go 250, 350 kilowatts. The majority of charging is gonna be done at home anyway, and when you're road tripping, it really doesn't make that big an impact. The charging curve matters more than the peak charging speed, and because the battery pack is pretty small, I think 120 kilowatts or something like that would be perfectly fine for this price, this class of vehicle. We're not going for the most luxurious experience. We're not going for game-changing range, like the whole beauty of the Chevy Bolt. And I think the reason that so many people were mad when GM announced that they were going to kill it off was the affordability. That was by far the most difficult thing to argue with when you tried to compare anything else to the Chevy Bolt. Was like, yeah, but are you $20,000 after incentives? Like, because no one else could really claim that and be a vehicle that doesn't require any gasoline, of course. So I'm very grateful that they've decided they're going to bring it back in some form, but we shouldn't ignore the fact that the existing Chevy Bolt is still going to be killed off in the next couple months. They're going to halt production, and I think the design as we know it is going to change. The specs are probably going to be changed, and GM has just essentially said that the brand name will live on in a newer generation of the Bolt in the future. And yes, that one will be rocking the Ultium battery pack, which should mean faster charging, and hopefully if it comes out in 2025, it will also be rocking the NACS port. So just picture that for a second. An EV that's close to $20,000 after incentives, has the NACS port, has 250+ miles of range, and it's a hatchback, so it's already got some advantages over the Model 3 in terms of storage capabilities and ride height. Yeah, I think that's going to be a very compelling option for a ton of people out there. Not a Tesla killer by any means. Anybody who uses that term Tesla killer is an idiot, in my opinion. But there's a lot of room for all kinds of EVs in the market. There's tons of different preferences, and there's a bunch of different reasons people will buy one car over another. So I'm very excited to see this next generation of the Bolt. And what are you guys most interested in for them to revive it? And what would you suggest them take out or simplify to make it more affordable to produce? Single piece castings? What makes sense? Let me know down in the comments below. And thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps me out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.